high up in the Himalayan mountains. This is where two major countries meet, China and India. Between them, the longest disputed land border in the world, a border that has even seen violent clashes. We'll track their relationship from these snowy peaks to the vast Indian Ocean, to unravel where these two giants are heading, what that means for the region, and what this holiday island paradise has to do with it. China and India are two powerhouses in Asia. One, a democracy, the other, an authoritarian state. They have the second and fifth biggest economies in the world. Both possess nuclear arsenals. Combined, almost 3 billion people live in these two countries. That's more than a third of the world's entire population. So how these two nations perceive each other is pretty important. Lately, it's more about rivalry than cooperation.
I would even say that the Indian and China relationship in the recent years is from bad to even worse.
Economic ties remain, trade ties remain, but the diplomatic ties have cooled down and the military ties, security ties, have become very tense and very vexed between India and China.
But that wasn't always the case. In the past, they actually sought close ties.
After the communist government took control in China in 1949 and India became independent from British colonial rule in 1947. Initially, the ties were very strong.
Sushant Singh is an expert on Indian national security. He's a lecturer at Yale University in the US and a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research in India.
Both the countries thought that they could work together and would become, this new axis around which Asia could emerge as a powerful entity in global relations.
But that didn't happen. So what went wrong? One answer can be found here, high up in the Himalayan mountains. This is a hostile environment, a cold desert dominated by rock and ice. Let's go to the Galwan Valley. This is where Indian and Chinese soldiers guard a disputed border. In 2020, they clashed right here at a bend of the icy Galwan River. Reports say at least 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers died in hand-to-hand combat. Many more could have been killed that day had the two sides not agreed years ago on a weapon-free zone which remains in place around the border. There's never been a real explanation for what happened. Since then, both sides have deployed massive amounts of troops. And after more than 20 rounds of talks, there's still no real resolution. The stalemate continues, even 4 years later. Here's the national spokesperson for India's ruling party at the Munich Security Conference in Germany in early 2024.
Despite all the mischievous activities at the border or attempts of intrusion on the border, India remains strong and India knows how to fully capable to deal with the dragon.
And while China's top diplomat didn't mention the tensions with India directly, he reinforced China's official line on this kind of issue.
With a vast territory and over a dozen neighbouring countries, China faces complex disputes left from history. On that, China has stayed committed to managing differences through consultation and resolving disputes through dialogue.
The problem, the two countries can't agree on where exactly the border runs. There are 3 main disputed areas. The first one is part of Kashmir, a region contested by China, India and Pakistan. This area is called Aksai Chin. It's controlled by China but claimed by India. Then there's the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which China claims in its entirety, calling it South Tibet. And in the middle there are other, smaller flashpoints too. So mapping this area is difficult and sensitive. Last year, China published a new standard map showing these territories as its own, sparking fury in India and again turning the conflict up a notch.
The nationalistic emotion is become stronger and stronger, and both government cannot afford to show weakness in terms of border dispute.
This is Shitao Li, head of DW's Chinese service based in Bonn, Germany. He has covered India-China relations for many years, and he says the border conflict is at the heart of the rivalry.
No government will say that, okay, let's make a compromise, let's give some land to the other side, let's make peace. It will not happen, and more less likely, I would say. So there's an unsolvable problem, and the only thing is both governments try to keep the status quo.
Part of the problem can be traced back to colonial times. British maps from the 19th and early 20th centuries show different versions of where the border runs. Or no clear border at all, like this British map from 1947, the year India became independent. Tibet plays a role here too. Back then, Tibet was a buffer separating India from China. It was de facto independent, as shown in many maps from the first half of the 20th century. But that changed after China took full control of Tibet in the 1950s. In 1959, the Tibetan uprising started. It was quickly crushed by Chinese soldiers. And Tibet's spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, fled to India, angering China. Shortly after that, skirmishes started to erupt between India and China. All of that made the prospect of agreeing on a common border more difficult, and since then it's never become a reality. So what is shown on most maps today is in many areas just a loose demarcation line called the Line of Actual Control, or LAC for short. The two sides can't agree on where exactly this boundary runs, or how long it is. Hotspots along the disputed border are guarded by tens of thousands of troops on each side. That's why the two countries have been busy building roads, bridges and tunnels along the LAC. Infrastructure is key to getting soldiers into the mountains quickly. One recent example here at the Sela Pass. India has just inaugurated a major tunnel here. This will enable the Indian Army to move its troops to the LAC faster, no matter the weather. On the Chinese side, flatter terrain makes building roads easier.
Therefore, India is only playing a catch-up with China, and the Indian infrastructure, even today, remains much lesser than that of China.
That's the case on many levels.
They are not equal in any way. China is a much bigger economy, much bigger military power, much bigger technological power. India is heavily import dependent on China.
There's another reason why India is afraid of Chinese dominance: water. The rivers originating in the Himalayas supply fresh water to around 1.3 billion people. Water scarcity is already a great concern in South Asia, and climate change will only make this problem worse. China has built several dams in the region, transforming the landscape. The potential for hydropower is immense. Chinese engineers have even proposed building the world's largest hydropower plant at this river bend. Plans like these leave many Indians fearing China could end up in control of the flow of its vital rivers. So this is a conflict over land, over resources, over influence. Let's move from the mountains to another region where this conflict is palpable: the Indian Ocean. It's a vast area, stretching for more than 10,000 kilometers from the tip of Africa to Australia. Economically, militarily, strategically, this is one of the most important regions in the world. It's a crucial trade route for China, the world's #1 exporter of goods.
That's the primary reason Indian Ocean is extremely important to China. The second reason Indian Ocean is important to China is because it wants to project power.
China's interest in the region goes back well over a decade, and it has substantially increased its investments there. China has stakes in over 20 ports in the Indian Ocean region. Some of them even have the potential for naval use. Let's take the port of Djibouti, for example. This is what it looked like in May 2015. And after huge Chinese investment, here's how it looks today. China now has not only a port situated on one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, but also a military base here. And by the way, all that only a couple of miles away from the US base also located in the country. Now, if you take this port in Djibouti, along with other ports that have a strong Chinese presence, like these ones in Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Pakistan, India starts to look surrounded. This is part of what some analysts call China's string of pearls strategy, and it has India worried.
Let me first say that pearls look benign unless you ask the oysters. From an Indian point of view, I would say it's very reasonable for us to actually prepare for a far greater Chinese presence than we have seen before.
That's why in recent years, India has started building up its capacities in the Indian Ocean. Although the country is still far behind other big players, India is investing. Its naval defence budget is increasing every year. India is focusing on some key areas, the Malacca, Lombok and Sunda Straits in the Indian Ocean. These are the bottlenecks connecting the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Chinese warships like this one have to pass through these straits to enter the Indian Ocean, and India wants to make sure it can at least monitor these passages. For example, here, India has a naval air station at the southern end of the Nicobar Islands, just 450 kilometres from the Malacca Strait. Speaking of islands, this is where the Maldives come into play. Their position in the middle of the Indian Ocean makes these small islands quite important strategically. They're not only a dream destination for wealthy tourists, they're also a hub for trade and infrastructure, and for security. For a long time, the leaders of the Maldives were sympathetic towards India. But more recently, loyalties have shifted. In last year's election, pro-China candidate Mohamed Muizzu won after campaigning with the slogan "India Out." This year, he's already visited Chinese President Xi Jinping and ordered Indian troops to leave the Maldives.
There is a narrative that India should be more dominant in the Indian Ocean region, more aggressive in the Indian Ocean region. I think India is constrained by a lack of resources in what it can do within the Indian Ocean region.
And India's up against China, which has the biggest navy in the world, even surpassing the US. One of India's strategies, forming alliances with powerful partners. India is a member of the so-called Quad, a diplomatic, security-focused partnership with the US, Australia and Japan. And India's deepening relationship with the US has angered China.
The last thing Beijing would like to see is India become a 100% United States ally. That would be for China, of course, the worst case. Because if you look around China, there are already many United States allies around it, like South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and now even Vietnam also goes a little bit in the direction. So if India goes completely to the western side, will be for China very, very bad.
But India is also careful to maintain links with China, despite tensions. The two countries are members of the same groups aimed at countering Western dominance, the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That strategy, trying to keep up very different alliances, is a tough balancing act. But for India, it's a way of keeping its options open, especially with such a dominant neighbour. Recently, China's economy has slowed down, while India's is growing. It's attracting foreign investment and gaining confidence.
China being China is a reality, but equal reality, India is a rising power.
Still, India is a long way off catching up with China.
It's generally accepted in the global business community that the next China is still China.
Back to our hotspots, an unresolved border dispute and a battle for influence in the Indian Ocean. Where is this rivalry heading? In the worst case, this could escalate. Could there even be potential for war?
I don't see this will happen because, first of all, those two countries are pretty much aware that they both have nuclear weapon, they're nuclear power. So both sides cannot afford to open a war with some consequences you cannot calculate. They both know this problem could not be solved, and they both need each other in some other area, economically, politically.
So the stalemate continues. Neither side wants to risk a bigger escalation, and neither can back down. If they find a way to settle their differences high up in the Himalayas and in the Indian Ocean, the neighbours could be powerful partners. But for now, China and India look set to continue competing for influence and status. Two giants on thin ice.